For centuries, the Roman Empire was held together by men who lived in the mud and the blood of the battlefield. By the late 2nd century, the state was guided by Marcus Aurelius. He was a philosopher-king who spent years commanding troops through freezing winter campaigns, earning his authority through continuous, grinding sacrifice. Then there was his son, Commodus. He was born into the absolute highest tier of imperial luxury. He never marched with the legions, and he was completely shielded from the brutal realities his father faced every day. When Marcus Aurelius died in 180 AD, Commodus assumed absolute control over an empire spanning 3 continents, commanding a standing army of nearly 400,000 soldiers and a bureaucracy that held the Mediterranean world together. He was only 19 years old. While his father had spent decades managing logistics and leading troops in the Germanic wars, Commodus took his seat in Rome, having never commanded a legion or drafted a decree. For the first time in over a century, the Roman throne was occupied by a ruler who reached power through birthright rather than demonstrated merit. Commodus almost immediately withdrew from the daily operations of statecraft. He hated military campaigns and ignored administrative duties, preferring to hand the actual running of the empire over to self-serving advisors and officials. Left unchecked, these newly empowered delegates quickly realized they could do whatever they wanted. They began siphoning state resources away from essential imperial defense, instead funneling that wealth to pay for Commodus's lavish personal parties and massive public celebrations. This line chart tracks treasury reserves, showing a steep drop aligning with his extravagant imperial games. This massive deficit gap dried up essential funds for roads, aqueducts, and border security. Local corruption flourished because the bankrupt central government could no longer enforce the law. By delegating his power to chase constant entertainment, Commodus reversed the very purpose of his office. Instead of a steward protecting the economy, the emperor became a massive financial liability, draining the state dry. His most shocking decision happened when he stepped onto the sand of the Colosseum. In Roman society, gladiators were the absolute lowest class, mostly slaves, prisoners of war, and condemned criminals. A sitting emperor willingly fighting alongside them was deeply offensive to Roman sensibilities. He turned his arena appearances into massive theatrical productions. He believed he was a living god, appearing before the massive crowds draped in lion skins and carrying a massive club, declaring himself the reincarnation of Hercules. Of course, a god cannot lose. The fights were heavily rigged. Commodus squared off against wild animals, chained safely to the floor, and human opponents who were severely injured or incapable of fighting back. He guaranteed his own invincibility. Every single one of these vanity projects cost the already bankrupt state a fortune to produce. The empire was physically crumbling around him, and he was spending what little money was left to buy applause. His detachment from reality deepened. He forced the Senate to rename the months after his titles, stamped his face across the currency, and even tried renaming Rome itself to Commodiana. He was entirely consumed by the need for public adoration. He couldn't see that his theatrical stunts were rapidly alienating his own inner circle and hollowing out the empire he was supposed to protect. By late 192 AD, the situation reached a breaking point. The senators, military leaders, and even his closest confidants finally realized that the man treating Rome as his personal stage was going to take the entire empire down with him. A conspiracy formed right inside the palace. After an attempt to poison his food failed, the conspirators sent a professional wrestler named Narcissus into the emperor's private chamber on New Year's Eve. Commodus was strangled to death before the new year could begin. The removal of the emperor did not resolve the deeper crisis. The state treasury was exhausted, border defenses were underfunded, and the corruption embedded in the bureaucracy during the previous 12 years left the empire in a state of continuous civil unrest and economic contraction. Running an empire is an act of relentless, grueling management. When a leader abandons that responsibility to chase the validation of a cheering crowd, the foundation of the state fractures in ways that can rarely be repaired.